Well, this follow-up class for this week, these last 2 hours, really just a very general introduction to the subject, to Italy. I want to show you some things you might find interesting, some things you never knew about, a little bit about the discovery of classical art. Next week is when we really get down to the serious work. So next week you really have to start making your notes. Well, this course is technically Roman architecture, but as I explained, I'll be doing Roman art and architecture. You can't really do one without the other. And I want to just start off today by explaining the term Roman. What do we mean by the term Roman? An adjective. Well, noun and an adjective, but the term Roman, when used as an adjective, Roman architecture and art, or Roman pottery, or the Roman Empire, means those things, practices, customs, belonging to or connected with or relating to ancient Rome. Ancient Rome, the Rome of the period from the 8th century BC, going down to the Byzantine period, whenever you want to start the Byzantine period, usually about the 4th century BC. So by extension, Roman also applies to those things which are usual and common amongst the people of ancient Rome, the inhabitants of the regions controlled by Rome as well. So that's really what we mean by Roman architecture in this particular case. Hello, I've taught you before. Didn't I teach you in Great Discovery?
Yes.
Oh, all right, okay. Yeah. So this is what we mean by Roman. What we're going to be looking at then is Roman architecture and art from roughly the 8th century BC down to the 4th century after Christ. There is a big change in the 4th century after Christ when Christianity becomes, in effect, the dominant religion. So that's a very convenient stopping off point there. What we need to do, though, to get ourselves really into the course is to look at Italy and give you a very brief account of Rome itself. A bit of geography. Like I said, this is all very introductory, so you don't have to make any detailed notes or any notes at all on this particular class. Let's look at a quick look at Italy, the geography of Italy, and specifically the Italian peninsula. Now, modern Italy includes Sardinia and Sicily. But when we talk about the ancient world, we mean the Italian peninsula. Just this part here, the bit that's shaped like a boot, it's about 700 kilometers long, it's about 150 kilometers wide, sticks out in the middle of the Mediterranean, with the Balkans to one side, and then you've got the Western Mediterranean Sea over there. In many ways, you wouldn't expect Italy to become the center of what was a world power, Roman Empire, because the geography of Italy, the physical geography, divides it up into lots of different regions. Well, you can see here you've got these little areas of lowland like that. You've got mountains that keep on going up to the sea on either side. But the most important mountain range to know about is this one that goes all the way down the center of Italy, the mountains we know as the Apennines. They're broken up into a series of discrete blocks going all the way down. Throughout most of Italy, the Apennines reach a height of about 1,250 meters. They do reach up to 2,000 meters, though, in this central part here. What is important to know about the Apennines, why do we need to know about this, is because it divides Italy into a western and an eastern part, very distinctly. What you find on the west is the narrow coastal plain, and on the east a narrow coastal plain. And the Apennines are a serious problem in getting from one side of Italy to the other. Always have been. Well, this is the Apennines in the highest part in central Italy, going up to 2,000 meters. And as you can see, the Apennines are broken up into lots of different hills. You get hundreds, literally hundreds of small Italian towns like this, with beautiful Renaissance architecture in them. Very difficult to get to, though. You can see the influence of the Apennines on communications in Italy. The north-south route, the main north-south route in the Roman period had to go along the west coast. In the modern period, it's still more or less along the west coast. There's only 2 or 3 roads that ran across the Apennines in the Roman period. Even today, there are not that many roads. Now, I love this particular photograph. It does date to 1944. But the thing about this photograph, why I particularly like this photograph, is it does show you what is now one of the main roads across the Apennines. So as recently as 1940s, these roads were effectively dirt tracks. And you can see these American soldiers having great trouble with their Jeep, trying to get their Jeep actually over the Apennines. So the influence of the Apennines on contact within Italy is something you've always got to be aware of when we look at the expansion of Rome. So the Apennines result in forming basically 2 coastal plains, relatively narrow. The east one is narrower than the western one, but they're still broken up by mountains, so you can't really get directly north-south along the coastal plains. There's also this area up here, big flat area, the Po Valley, I'll come back to in a moment. Rome becomes important, quite simply because what we find happening in Rome, I've just realised I've put the wrong version of my slide on. Never mind, we'll get a different one when you get your textbooks. Rome sort of stuck down here. It's located in an area where they've got good access to the one coastal plain, relatively flat, good for growing crops, good for grazing animals to a certain extent as well. As you go up inland towards the mountains, you've got this more hilly landscape, which is very good for sheep and cattle, but not that good for actually growing crops on as well. Now, why did I put this one on? I put this one on because I just want to briefly mention the Po Valley at the top here. The Po Valley, the River Po, comes from the Alps, stretches through this beautiful flat area here. Venice is just over there. You would think this would be a wonderful area for settlement. It isn't, because it's incredibly marshy, very flat, very low lying. And although there was some settlement in that area in the Iron Age, it didn't really become that prosperous an area until much later. So the Po Valley looks like it might be a good area for settlement, but wasn't really that heavily settled until much later. Again, looking at geography, coming back to settlement areas, land use areas, you can see again how the Apennines do divide Italy into these 2 main parts like this. You've got this flat area coming down into Rome there, and you can see from the land use diagram there how basically the mountain area for pasture, cereal growing today, of course, concentrated in the Po Valley, but possible along both the west and the east plains. The thing is about Italy, like Greece, like Turkey, it does have rather excellent soil, volcanic soil, and an excellent climate. And this does mean, this is one of the reasons why Italy became such a important world power, is that in Italy you can grow the 4 main crops, the 4 main food items of antiquity, the Mediterranean diet. Well, you've got cereals, making pasta. Where was pasta invented? And lots of arguments about this. We don't know for certain that pasta existed in Italy until the 15th century. But cereals for making pasta, for making bread. You've got olives for olive oil, but also for eating. Olive oil gives you very important minerals, all sorts of things you do need to stay alive and reasonably healthy. But olive oil also used for lighting at night. Olive oil also used for the massage, for cleaning your hair as well. Didn't think of that one. You've got also the legumes, the cereals, the pulses, merciac, that sort of thing, and the grape in all of its different forms. So grapes eaten raw like this or dried, and of course made into wine as well. A particular popular product of Italy today. What do we know about ancient Italy? Italy in the past? Well, not really a great deal, except we do know that in terms of other natural resources, Italy is one of the lesser but important centres for obtaining copper and for iron, hematite for making iron. Copper, not as plentiful as on the island of Cyprus, but already in the Bronze Age, copper is needed for making bronze. We find that the people in the area, the Romans knew as Etruria, roughly in the modern Roman Italian province of Tuscany. They're producing copper there for export around the Mediterranean, but much more importantly, iron. This changeover between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, why does it happen? Well, if you've done anything on technology, you will know that copper is relatively easy to find, and it's very easy to make something out of it, especially if you add tin to make bronze. Bronze gives you harder tools and harder weapons than iron does. But to make bronze, you need tin. Tin can only be found in very few locations in the ancient world. Britain was one of them. Spain was another. There's some tin in Italy, but not very much. With the disruption, with the change, the dramatic change in trade patterns caused by the Dark Ages, when we get these mass population movements towards the around about the 12th century BC, 11th century BC, all international trade is disrupted. People start making iron tools afterwards. This is a very important stage in the history of Italy, because this particular area of Etruria is where you find lots of hematite. This is raw natural copper, that's raw natural hematite. And in particular, there's one area in Etruria, the island of Elba, which is famous for its iron, from ancient times right through to the 20th century. If you've done your history of civilizations, you should remember that Elba was the island where Napoleon was sent to in 1814, was it? Do you know what a palindrome is? You know me, I always give you some useless information. You don't know what a palindrome is? A palindrome is something that can be read backwards and forwards. This is what Napoleon said. Air, an old English word for before. Able was I ere I saw Elba. Elba was I ere I saw Elba. It's National Palindrome Day soon, I think. Anyway, so the island of Elba. If you go to the island of Elba, and it's a very popular tourist destination now, but on some of the beaches, what you can find are these mounds like that. They're not tumuli, they're not places where dead holiday makers have been buried or anything like that. These are actually waste tips from the very early Iron Age, and as I said, the hematite on Elba is so good that even right up until the beginning of the 20th century, it was still being mined. And today, with improved methods of mining, people are going back to dig up the waste tips to get what they can from that. Well, Etruria is important to know about for reasons which I'll come on to a bit later. But what about the peoples of Italy? What do we know about the peoples of Italy? Well, here we come up with a rather unusual situation, one of these things that archaeologists still don't properly understand. We know that at the time writing started in Italy, roughly about 800 BC, basically the majority of the peoples living in Italy spoke what we would call an Italic language. The Italic languages are Indo-European languages. Latin is an Italic language. The Indo-European languages include Hittite, ancient Greek, modern English, German, and so forth. The Indo-European languages spread throughout the whole of Europe in particular. And what we find when people in Italy, what we call Italy, start writing in 800 BC or thereabouts, is that most people in Italy spoke one or other form of Italic language. Umbrian, Latin, Cilician, Oscan, Mesopaic, these type of languages. There was one part of Italy, however, where people spoke a completely different language, and that was the region known as Etruria. The people living there, the Romans called them the Etruscans. We've got lots of examples of Etruscan writing. The Etruscan language is an unknown language. Fortunately for us, they use letters similar to the Romans. We assume that these letters had the same sound, so we can identify names and a very few Etruscan words. But the Etruscan language is not Indo-European. It's one of the ancient languages of Europe, like Basque, spoken in North Spain and South France. It's not related to anything. Albanian is another one. These are languages that go back very early in time. So we assume that the Etruscans, the people the Romans called the Etruscans, were the original inhabitants of Italy. Etruscan continued to be spoken, or at least written down, we know until the time of the Emperor Claudius, the 1st century AD. The Roman Emperor Claudius is the last person we know of who could actually speak and understand Etruscan. But otherwise, we don't know anything about the Etruscans, but the Etruscans are very important to our classes. Why? Etruria is where there's lots of very good iron ore, the island of Elba in particular. With the beginning of the Iron Age, people come from the eastern Mediterranean, from what we would call Greece, to Etruria to get iron ore to take back to make iron weapons and so forth. What we find happening, probably around about 900 BC, there's a lot of argument about the dates, is that traders, Greek-speaking traders, start to sail up into this area. They bring with them objects to trade, pottery. They bring with them ideas, architecture, temples, writing. What they want, of course, is iron ore, which they can take back to Greece. So what we find happening in about 800 BC is that the northern part of Italy is suddenly becoming exposed to Greek culture, Greek ideas, the sort of thing that make ancient Greece. Pottery, Greek customs, wine drinking, all sorts of things like that. By around about 750 BC, and quite possibly earlier, we also find that Greek people are beginning to settle in Italy. The thing is, of course, that in ancient times, sailing ships would have to go around the coast like this. You know, there's not always a good place to find a harbour for the night. But they must have realised that large areas of Italy were uninhabited. So we start to find Greeks migrating from Greece itself. It's all part of a very long-term process that probably starts off 900 BC, in which the Greek settlements are sending out people to live in other places. So bit by bit, we find a creation of what we know as Magna Graecia. Magna Graecia, the Latin term meaning Greater Greece. All these places here are Greek settlements. These are places where Greek continued to be the main language down into the 1st century after Christ and even later. They're little islands of Greek speakers surrounded by Italian language speakers. But because they're settling there, they're bringing also with them their own Greek particular customs, aspects of Greek culture, architecture and art. And so you can see how the influence of Greeks starts spreading into Italy. So we have, for example, a very well-developed trade in many ways in Greek pottery going into Etruria. This is a good piece of Greek black figure pottery that was found in Etruria. If you want to study Greek pottery, some people like studying it, if you want to study Greek pottery, the best collections are in Tarquinia in Tuscany, or the Greek pottery that's been found inside Etruscan graves in that particular region. Well, I'll say a bit more about Rome at another time, but I do want to make a point here about the influence of Roman art, Greek art on Roman art. Now, the Romans basically get their idea of art from the Etruscans. They get their ideas and architecture from the Etruscans. The Etruscans have got it from the Greeks. But what the Romans do is something very clever. They start to see the advantage of using art as a form of propaganda. That for the Greeks, art was never propaganda. Architecture was never propaganda. But for the Romans, it becomes a form of propaganda. So I'm just going to lead you into a little funny session here. As I said, I copied down the wrong PowerPoint on my what's it disk today. So I'm going blubber, blubber, flubber, flubber, flubber. Thank heavens above, this is an introductory class. Otherwise we would have a problem. I didn't say that. He draws his lips shut. When we look at this, for example, this is a coin of 83 BC. Nice Roman silver denarius coin. And on this coin, what we have here is an image which we can identify as the fasces. Well, the fasces is the symbol of authority in ancient Rome. The fasces is the bundle of 12 sticks wrapped around an axe. They symbolize political authority in Rome, high political authority. What they symbolized was that only the elected magistrates of the Roman Republic had the power to punish a Roman citizen. Nobody else could. Only a magistrate, after a due process of law. If the crime he was punished for was not too important, then he would be beaten with the sticks. It's what we call corporal punishment. But if it was a crime deserving the death sentence, that's what the axe was for capital punishment. Capital from the Latin word for the head, corporal from the Latin word for the body. Well, this is what the fasces look like in various carvings in Rome. I mean, the fasces appear everywhere. This is a symbol of authority in the Roman world. We see them, for example, carved here on the tombstone of somebody who died at Ephesus, actually, but they symbolized the fact that he was a magistrate at Rome. The Romans used propaganda in their statues. This is a very famous statue of the Emperor Augustus, known as the Prima Porta statue. You can see he's standing here like this, with one arm extended out like that. We know this expression as an adlocutio. And what the adlocutio means is the address, the speech to the people or to the soldiers. He's wearing armour, but on the breastplate you've got this rather blurred illustration which shows a barbarian surrendering to a Roman. So this art aspect is propaganda. It's not just a statue, it's a statue with a message. This is just one part of the message of this particular statue, and you'll learn all about this, I'm afraid, in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. Art is propaganda. You see it continuing in later times in other countries. The United States in 1917 until 1945 issued this, what they call the Mercury dime, 10-cent piece, because it shows the god Mercury on one side. But what's this on the other side? Fasces. The Republic of the United States of America. In Washington, D.C., Abraham Lincoln, one of the 5 or so best ever American presidents, statue in his memory. What's he holding on either side? The fasces. House of Congress in the United States of America, George Bush saying, "We've won," or something to that effect. "In God we trust, everybody else has to pay cash." Do you know that joke? You didn't know that joke? Yeah, the American dollar bill has got Ingoldsby Trust on one side. Ingoldsby Trust, but everybody else has to pay cash. But look what's on either side. The Fussies. Go to New York. Go to Prospect Park. What do you see? The Fussies. Well, the Fussies, of course, a very popular symbol to symbolize republicanism in the early 20th century. But the Fussies was also adopted as a political symbol by this man, Benito Mussolini, who was basically ruler of Italy from 1922 to 1944. Not bad going. Well, here's Benito Mussolini. And what's Benito Mussolini doing? The Adlocutio. Unfortunately, all the statues of him were destroyed after the Second World War, so you can't find any statues of him actually doing this, but he's often shown in that particular way. Any buildings constructed at the time of Mussolini in Italy have the fasces on them. My favourite, if you ever go to see the Areopagus Augusta, or Augustus' mausoleum in Rome, you'll find this on a building from the time of Mussolini, the fasces, and that's actually just the beginning of Mussolini's name there. They didn't remove it at the end of the Second World War. But of course the fasces associated with Mussolini, Mussolini associated with Adolf Hitler, the whole thing gets tied up with fascism, which is where we get that actual word from. Adlocutio statue crops up everywhere. Saddam Hussein, being pulled over in 2003 on that particular side. How's the time going? I don't have my watch. No, 1440. Well, Roman art then is used as propaganda in many ways. That's one of the funny things about Roman art. One thing that we're going to see, though, in this course looking at Roman art is, yes, Roman art is often dismissed as being copyist, it just copies Greek models, and that is true to a certain extent. This is a very famous statue that was found in Italy. It was probably made in the 1st century BC, possibly as late as the 1st century after Christ. It's known as the Dying Gaul. It's actually a copy of a bronze statue that was made at Pergamum in Asia Minor sometime around about 200 BC. So yes, the Romans did copy a lot of Greek art. They were influenced by Greek art, and we'll see this is especially true for the early Roman period. But one nice thing about the Romans is they introduce a sense of realism in their art. Their art shows you lots of other bits and pieces about the world which you wouldn't really know about. The Greeks never show you statues or relief carvings of people doing everyday things. They're always nice statues, mourning mothers, crying children or something like that. But the Romans give us an illustration in their art of everyday life. This is quite a famous carving that was found in Germany. It's on a tombstone. It's a monument to a cloth merchant. He wants people to know he's a cloth merchant. Well, we assume that Romans had various things in their everyday life, like we would have, like scarves and so forth. What we actually see in this carving of the cloth merchant is pillows. Now, you know, we assume that they must have had pillows, but this gives us that nice piece of evidence. Here we've got scarves hanging there. Here we've got the lady sitting down while the husband does a deal with the cloth merchant over there. Probably a slave there, a young son sort of sitting by the side looking totally and utterly bored. Yes, I know what it's like to go shopping. Did you know that the average attention span, actually the maximum attention span of a male going shopping with a female is 45 minutes? There's been lots of studies done on that, 45 minutes. So if you go shopping with your boyfriend or something like that, and after 45 minutes he turns around and goes, I've had enough, now you know why. It's been proven by research. Other nice reliefs from the Roman period. Again, these aspects of everyday life. This is a great favourite of mine. This is one that was found in Germany. Again, it's part of a tombstone. And it shows the man who died. He was a very famous knife seller. He wanted everybody to know that he had the biggest collection of knives available, so his tombstone shows him standing there like that, holding out one of his knives for a customer to look at. His customer is wearing the classic costume of a Roman citizen, a toga. You've got the whole variety of different types of knives you've got for sale behind there. Look at his hair. We can date a lot of Roman sculptures from little things like hairstyles. This particular type of hairstyle was only common in the 1st century after Christ, so that helps give us a very nice date to this particular relief. Germany is full of reliefs showing wine merchants. Here we've got a wine boat going down the Rhine. The most famous of all these carvings, one found in the city of Trier, which actually shows a galley. Well, this is a warship. You can see it's a warship from its general design. So this is an official Roman Navy ship. But this Navy ship is actually taking barrels of something from one place to another. We assume it's wine, but it could be something else. More likely to be wine being taken along on this particular monument. Something we don't learn about from archaeology is transport. Here we have a lovely scene which actually shows a group of travellers sitting down at a tavern. You've got a big wine amphora out here, a wooden barrel containing water or beer or something like that, and a nice little wagon at the bottom. But Roman art also gives us wonderful insights into daily life, such as from here, a very famous painting from Pompeii. We don't have the caption on it, but it does actually have a caption on it, and the caption says, you are a cheat. And what it shows is 2 men, they're playing dice, they're gambling. He's obviously the one that stood up and called him the cheat. Well, you look at this, it's something, if you've seen Wild West films, you know, you're a cheat, bang, bang, everybody starts shooting each other. Well, it's the Roman equivalent, except he doesn't have a sword on. Otherwise, you could almost see him going into battle for this. Roman art helps us trace the history of dress. The toga, the classic piece of costume worn by the Roman male citizen, starts off in the Roman Republic period as a very long and heavy piece of wool. Woolen garments are heavy. A toga is not just simply a bed sheet that you can take off the bed and wrap around yourself when you go to a fancy dress party. You would have to put 3 or 4 bed sheets together, end to end, to get the length of a toga, which was then worn wrapped around you like this, over your tunic. It's tucked in a couple paces. It has to go over the shoulder. There's no brooch, no buttons, definitely no zip fasteners. So you've got to walk around like this. Oh, flipping out, you know, getting very hot. But then, you know, later periods, you can see that everybody's getting fed up with this. This is a 4th century toga, and you can see there's much less material involved in this, and it's actually, you know, just a little bit that's draped over the arm. So we get some idea of Romans' dress fashion. One of my particular favourites is Roman hairstyles. How Roman hairstyles changed over time. There's just a series that date from, this will be the beginning of the 1st century after Christ. This is going into around about the AD 70s, going down to AD 100, going down to AD 200 or so. These incredibly elaborate hairstyles. They look really fantastic, don't they? They're wigs. Look. There's the real hairline. The real hairline is not quite visible on this particular one, but you can see it elsewhere. That may not be a wig, but think of Napoleonic France, you know, where sort of, you know, hairstyles went really ridiculous at that particular time as well. So, yes, hairstyles. And along with hairstyles, just to keep your hairstyle in place, of course, you have your hairnets like this, made of gold lace, nice sort of thing that men today should be buying their wives and girlfriends as presents. No? Okay, nobody can afford it. The thing about Roman art, though, study of Roman art is actually relatively a recent phenomenon. Our biggest collections of Roman art started to be assembled in the 17th century when people like Lord Arundel, he's actually Thomas Howard, the 21st Lord of Arundel, started travelling around the Mediterranean world collecting things for his own particular castle collection. He brought back large quantities of pottery like this, took them back to his home where they were placed on display. And this is why, when you look at Britain, in many British museums you find an awful lot of classical art taken back from Italy and other places in the 17th century, as for example with the Chatsworth Ganymede, named for the house where it's preserved now. Looks absolutely beautiful, doesn't it? Lovely piece of work there. Well, what you have to remember is that many of these statues were never like that when they were found. They were usually found in the Renaissance period, broken up into lots of little bits and pieces. This is a very famous type of statue. It's known as the Old Fisherman. The Old Fisherman was one of these Hellenistic, so it's Greek in origin, statues that was much loved by the Romans and copied by the Romans. There is no complete example, no. This is the most complete example that we do have. This was actually found at Aphrodisias, where it was made. Because the fact is that when we look at most classical sculpture today in museums, what we see are restorations. This is one that's mentioned in the textbook. It's known as the red fawn because of the type of red stone it was made of. Well, this was found broken up in Hadrian's Villa, Tivoli, just outside Rome in the 18th century. Broken up so it could be reused somewhere else, but sold for lots of money to some visiting person. But what's original of it? Not an awful lot, actually. I think all that leg has been reconstructed, that arm's been reconstructed, that's been reconstructed. So, you know, we do get a rather false impression of classical art in that particular sense. Which is why I put this on. Statues were painted. This is not often realised. When we look at a statue like the Prima Porta today, it looks like a wonderful piece of rather bare white marble. But that's not what it was like. Originally it was painted with colours like this. A red cloak, a military cloak. Augustus is wearing a red military cloak. Analysis shows that the breastplate was originally painted a bronze colour. Analysis shows that here we have the sky god. Well, the sky is blue, he's supporting a blue sky. Here we have that barbarian surrendering to a Roman general, the Roman general with his red coat. The detailed painting of the tunic and so forth. All these statues were originally painted. But once they fell over, which is why most of them have got broken noses, once they fell over, got buried in the dirt, these colours made of natural earths would deteriorate, and so they're lost. And it's only by analysis that we can actually see what they were like originally. As, for example, in this statue of somebody you've all heard of, because you've all seen the film Gladiator. Come on, hands up who hasn't seen the film Gladiator. I'm just going to say, everybody's seen the film. It took me several years to sit down and watch it because it's so inaccurate. But anyway, this is what Commodus, the main character in that film, actually looked like. And here we've got a very famous bust of him on display in the Vatican Museum, I think it is. And you can see he's originally was wearing a purple cloak with a red and white undershirt there, his hair coloured a light brown and with a fresh flesh complexion to his face as well. Right, well, I'm going to just mention this man. I'm not going to do the second hour because, as I said, I brought the wrong PowerPoint with me. You saw me working on it, didn't you? Yeah, I forgot to copy it on my stick. I came straight over. I'm just mentioning this man very briefly because his name will crop up occasionally in the first part of this course. Johann Joachim Winkelmann, born in Dresden, if I remember rightly. Very little schooling. He becomes a curator of a library collection, and he establishes basically the main works that we know of for starting off the study of ancient art in the 18th century. Right, well, I'll stop there, as I said. Whoa, aren't you all lucky?